The disappearance of a celebrity is one of the most intriguing mysteries in our world. It's baffling how someone can be a prominent figure in the limelight, but still disappear in front of the eyes of entire nations. And yet it does happen. From fledgling musicians to influential politicians, it seems that some people are simply dealt a tragic hand, regardless of their status. Join us for today's episode as we examine 3 cases of famous people still missing in 2025. Weldon Kees. Weldon Kees was born in 1914 in the city of Beatrice, Nebraska. After graduating high school, he attended university and rejected the idea of joining the family manufacturing business. Instead, he pursued more creative interests and started writing. In 1937, he moved to Colorado, where he began a degree in library science and met a woman named Anne Swan, whom he married later that year. While residing in Colorado and settling into his new life, Weldon started writing his poetry and stories more regularly. His novel, Fall Quarter, was written in the late 1930s, and although he sought to publish it, the publisher backed out of their contract following the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor. The novel is described as a dark, satirical comedy, and the publishers were concerned that Weldon's jabs at small-town Americans would look unpatriotic, given everything that was going on in the world. It was later published in 1990, long after he'd vanished. The year of 1941 wasn't all bad for him, however, as his short story, The Life of the Mind, appeared in Best Short Stories. Weldon subsequently moved to New York, where he released his first poetry collection in 1943, The Last Man. In the following years, he moved between New York, San Francisco, and Cape Cod, working various writing jobs, including as a film critic and scriptwriter. He was, by all accounts, a very blunt and forthcoming sort of critic, referring to T.S. Eliot's play The Cocktail Party as appallingly amateurish, and describing paintings by Robert Motherwell as monstrous and unfathomable. Notably, though he had no training as an artist, Weldon would begin creating his own pieces, which were often abstract in style. By 1950, he had his work hung up alongside the likes of Picasso. But Weldon continued to create poetry. In 1953, he collaborated with a jazz clarinetist to write several ballads, and over the coming years showed more of his art, this time collages, at exhibits. In 1954, however, his life took a turn when his wife's alcoholism and paranoia gave way to a mental breakdown. She was institutionalized shortly afterwards, and Weldon filed for divorce. He began writing the book Nonverbal Communication with psychiatrist Jürgen Reusch around this time, which was a result of his time spent working as a research assistant at a psychiatric facility in the early 50s. To illustrate the book, Weldon began taking photographs, which was another new creative outlet for him. Despite all of Weldon's artistic endeavors, however, none seemed to net him the success and fulfillment he was searching for. His musical collaborations landed him no hits, a film company he set up ended in a lawsuit, and a building he'd leased to put on performances was closed by a fire marshal in 1955, just days before the opening of a play he had written for his actor friends. Furthermore, Weldon's state of mind was reportedly affected by the end of his marriage. Though he had relationships following the divorce, they didn't last long, and often ended abruptly. He was also known to be self-medicating with barbiturates around this time. Weldon was last heard from on Monday, July 18th, 1955. That afternoon, he called 2 of his friends, the first of whom was Janet Richards, who'd been on her way to collect her mother-in-law from the airport. Weldon reportedly told her, "Things are pretty bad. I may go to Mexico to stay." He was reportedly fascinated by the country thanks to various novels he'd read, including Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. Janet, however, was too distracted and did not understand the gravity of her friend's situation. She'd later reflect, "I felt like a murderer." The other friend Weldon called that day was Pauline Kael, a writer and broadcaster, whom he'd asked, "What keeps you going?" The following day, Weldon's car was discovered on the north side of the Golden Gate Bridge by a highway patrolman. The keys were still in the ignition. Two friends of the writer's went to check out his apartment to find that his cat, Lonesome, was still there, and a pair of red socks were located in the sink. His wallet, watch, and sleeping bag were all missing, as were his savings account book. He didn't leave behind any notes, and he is still missing to this day. Sean Flynn. Sean Flynn was born on May 31st, 1941, to Australian-American Hollywood icon Errol Flynn and French-American actress Lily Demeter. The couple had married 6 years earlier when Errol was relatively unknown, and they divorced in 1942, following a tumultuous union in which Errol accused Lily of being unstable and violent. Following the split, Sean was raised mostly by his mother. He attended school in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and following his graduation, he enrolled at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, but dropped out to pursue a career in acting. Sean had a few minor roles before landing his first starring role in The Son of Captain Blood, the sequel to his father's hit film Captain Blood. Shortly after signing the contract for the film in 1961, he also signed a recording contract for High Fidelity RV Records, with whom he had already recorded several songs. Throughout the early and mid-1960s, he took on several other movie and TV parts, including Stop Train 349, Mission to Venice, and The Temple of the White Elephant. However, by 1964, he had grown bored of acting. Though he took roles until 1966, he spent his free time trying new things. In 1964, he spent time as a game warden in Kenya and sought to become a safari guide. He mostly returned to the screen when he needed money. His final and 8th film, Five Ashore in Singapore, was filmed in 1966 and released in 1968. In January of 1966, a few months before the filming of Five Ashore began, Sean went to South Vietnam as a photojournalist, initially working for the magazine Paris Match, then Time Life, and then for United Press International. It seemed that this career path worked well for Sean. Before long, his photos were being published in magazines and papers internationally, and he made a name for himself as a journalist who was willing to go into high-risk areas and even put himself in the middle of combat in order to obtain photos that weren't just good, but which showed the brutal and tragic realities of what was happening around the world. 4 months after arriving in South Vietnam, in April of 1966, Sean and his patrol, consisting of several US Green Berets and Nung mercenaries, were ambushed by the Viet Cong. At the time, he was carrying an assault rifle, and he was suddenly thrown into combat, forced to fight his way out along with the other men. He escaped from the conflict with little more than a knee injury, and later reflected on the situation, stating, "I thought not only me, but all of us were greased." Later that same year, he reportedly saved a group from disaster when he identified a mine while taking photographs of the soldiers, allowing them to avoid any casualties. In 1967, Sean headed to Jordan to cover the Arab-Israeli War. He returned to Vietnam in late 1968, following the Tet Offensive, and while working as a cameraman for CBS News, he was injured during a fight between US and North Vietnamese forces. He traveled to Cambodia in 1970, after learning that the North Vietnamese had been pushing into the country. Sean was last seen on April 6, 1970, when he was just 28 years old. He and fellow photojournalist Dana Stone decided to travel from Phnom Penh to a press conference in Saigon on their motorbikes, while most of their fellow reporters opted to travel via limousine. Steve Bell, the last reporter to see them alive, told The Independent, "Afterwards, we all headed back to Phnom Penh, but they said they wanted to go forward. They had heard there was a checkpoint that was being manned by the Viet Cong. I thought that you could see the Viet Cong there." Steve took a photo of the two right before they left for their final journey. "We headed back to Phnom Penh, and no one ever saw them again. I think they were among the first to go missing. It had not reached the point where we knew quite how dangerous it was." Both Sean and Dana had been eager to interview the troops and didn't seem intimidated by the violence they could face. By June, around 25 journalists had been captured in Cambodia, with 4 having been apprehended earlier on the same day that Sean and Dana disappeared. 3 of these journalists were returned to their respective countries, but some were killed and many remained missing. Neither Sean nor Dana have ever been seen again, and their bodies have never been recovered. In the following years, there were many rumors and theories about their disappearance. Reports from indigenous sources claim that the 2 were killed in 1971 in Cambodia. Others, including an intercepted radio message from Viet Cong leadership, implied that the 2 were still alive. Some reports noted that there were rumors amongst small Cambodian villages that a movie star was being held. Following his disappearance, Sean's mother, Lily, spent much of her wealth looking for him. She was never able to find him, however, and he was declared legally dead in 1984. She died 10 years later, still not knowing what became of her son. In 2010, breaking reports emerged that the remains of Sean had been discovered, even though they were still awaiting DNA testing. The body had been found by 2 amateur bone hunters who, in a controversial move, sought to then sell the story of their discovery to the highest bidder. Journalists, including Tim Page, a colleague of Dana and Sean who had looked for answers himself, criticized the excavation of the remains, noting that it had been carried out unprofessionally and may have disturbed a large grave which held the remains of other missing journalists. Tim stated that he had excavated the same site in 2009 and had found bone fragments and teeth that were handed over for testing. The remains found by the bone hunters were reportedly located after a local man claimed that he had witnessed the execution of a tall, blonde foreigner who had been forced to dig his own grave before he was beaten to death. In June, however, test results showed that the skeletal remains did not belong to Sean. Neither Sean nor Dana have ever been found. Thomas Hale Boggs, Sr. Thomas Hale Boggs, Sr. was born February 15, 1914, in Long Beach, Mississippi. After graduating high school, he attended Tulane University, where he obtained a degree in journalism and later a law degree. However, though he practiced law for a short time, he soon took up a career in politics. In 1941, he was elected to the House of Representatives. Aged 26, he was the youngest member of Congress. However, in the following years, he lost his re-election campaign and subsequently served in the US Navy during World War II. After the war ended, he returned to politics and made his way back to Congress. Over the next few decades, he would be re-elected 13 times. Though popular among voters, Thomas was not without his controversies, one of the most notable occurring on April 5, 1971, when, as the House Majority Leader, he called for the resignation of J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. He accused the agency of tapping the phones of Congress members and placing agents on campuses to spy on students and faculty members, likening such actions to the tactics of the Soviet Union and Hitler's Gestapo. The FBI denied tapping any congressional phones. Many of Thomas's staff and colleagues were surprised by the outburst, which made newspaper headlines. The following day, President Richard Nixon told Republican Minority Leader Gerald Ford that he could no longer take counsel from Thomas and asked for an alternative advisor to be found. Ford reportedly speculated that the Majority Leader had either been drinking too much or taking some sort of drug that was causing him to lash out in distress. On October 16, 1972, Thomas boarded a plane with Representative Nick Begich of Alaska, whom he was campaigning for as part of his role as the House Majority Leader. The pair, along with Nick's aide, Russell Brown, and pilot Don Johns, were flying to a fundraising event for Nick in Alaska. The aircraft took off at 9 a.m., but never arrived. The subsequent search for the plane involved the FBI, Coast Guard, and the Civil Air Patrol, as well as hundreds of civilian volunteers. Though the wilderness was scoured for any trace of what was presumably a wreckage, nothing was found. Though things looked bleak, the loved ones of the missing men hoped they'd soon hear of some kind of distress signal, but nothing ever came. This incident led to the 1973 requirement that all aircraft have position-indicating emergency local transmitters. The National Transportation Safety Board, in their report, observed that the pilot's portable emergency transmitter had been left in another plane. After 39 days, on November 24th, the search was called off. None of the 4 people on board the plane have ever been found, nor has the aircraft itself. Notably, weather conditions in Alaska can turn quickly, which led to much speculation that although the morning seemed clear, poor weather ultimately led to the disappearance of the plane and all those on board. However, due to the nature of Thomas and Nick's positions in the government, their disappearance has been picked apart by conspiracy theorists in the decades since. There were rumors that the men had staged their disappearances or been abducted by the Soviet Union, or that their plane had, in some way, been tampered with due to Thomas's recent accusations against Hoover and the FBI. President Nixon's Watergate scandal only served to fuel such speculation. To this day, the whereabouts of the aircraft and those on board remain a mystery. Thomas was declared dead on January 3, 1973. His wife, Lindy, replaced him in Congress. She served for over 17 years. And there you have the facts. Please leave a comment down below with your own theories and speculations, and remember to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.